will get published on everything else afterwards, your regular podcasting, YouTube, everything else. So
okay, sounds good.
Well, everyone, welcome back to Tuxes and Tomahawks. I'm really excited to bring on retired Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch, who has the most badass sounding Army name since I think pretty much Patton himself driving tanks down the Rhine, right? So it's a really, really strong name. I think they need to name more kids, Oakland McCulloch in the future.
Yeah.
As an Irishman, I really also appreciate that. We've been playing this episode for a few weeks now, so I apologize for all the preamps leading up to this, but we finally found a time that worked for us. I'm really excited to bring his leadership expertise in here because, now I'm in the reserve. I'm no longer active duty, but there's so much going on, not only in the political landscape, the leadership aspect, but in our military, especially with the upcoming election and deciding who's going to be leading our Army into the future conflicts we're about to face with our near peer adversaries. And I would love to get the insight from Colonel McCulloch here on our near peer adversaries going into those conflicts and what's expected of our new leadership. So, sir, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, well, Adam, like you, I've been looking forward to this. So this would be a good show, I'm sure.
So let's just start off with the basics. Where are you from and what made you decide to join the United States Army?
I grew up in northern Illinois, a small little farm town about 90 miles northwest of Chicago, which is why I live in Daytona Beach, Florida, because I'm never living through winters like that ever again. And I was captain of my baseball, basketball, football team. I was student government president, class president. So I had some leadership experience, as little as that is, but a little bit. And I realized that that's really what I wanted to do, was be a leader. And I was looking around at places I could go to college, and United States Military Academy popped up. And so I applied. I got accepted for some reason. I didn't graduate from West Point. I only went there 2 years. Came home, helped my father run his business that he had started for about 18 months. And then I ended up in ROTC and graduated from Northern Illinois University Army ROTC, which is where I met my wife, by the way. She was in
Awesome.
Army ROT as well. She was an Army nurse for 8 years. And then once I got into the Army, got commissioned infantry, loved what I was doing. But besides that, I kind of realized, here I came from where I came from. My father never graduated from the 8th grade. My mother never graduated from the 10th grade. And yet I got to go to the United States Military Academy. I got commissioned in the Army. Mm-hmm. Nowhere else in the world does that happen. And I just told myself, look, I'm going to stay in the Army. I'm going to defend our American way of life so that my kids, your kids, somebody else's kids would have the same opportunities that I had growing up.
Yeah. And this is actually a really good story to bring on because I'm an Academy guy. I went to the Air Force Academy. Ironically, I live 20 minutes from West Point. I'm from New Jersey, New York area. So I decided I wanted to go out west because I thought I was going to go skiing and hang out. That didn't happen. I went to prison for 4 years out at the Air Force Academy. And, for people who know my background, I had a whole situation that developed after that. I made it all the way through. And then at the, a month after graduation, it was taken away from me for, political reasons. But I'm still in the Army. I'm still serving. But this is a good inspirational aspect from your story, though, is that you went to West Point for 2 years. You decided to leave, but then you still pursued that leadership desire to serve, and you still went through ROTC and commissioned. And for all the cadets out there who watch my show, keep that in mind, is that it doesn't matter where you get your commission from. No. It matters that what type of leader are you and what can you inspire those under your command to do. And even after all that, you still went infantry, which is pretty awesome. I have a deep felt love in my heart for my 11 Alpha and Bravos out there. Worked with them significantly over the years. But what inspired your leadership style? And I think this is something that it definitely doesn't get talked a lot right now. We're seeing so many generals and admirals and being held accountable for, loss in faith of command, and they're being removed from command positions on ships and all around the country right now. This has been going on for the last several years. What do you think has changed from your time in the Army until now in developing those leadership styles and what's expected of our officers now leading our military?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to go back to the thing about the academy and ROTC. I just had this conversation earlier today with an ROTC grad. And I recruited for Army ROTC, both as a professor of military science at University of South Alabama and here at Embry-Riddle. And I would, always had young men and women who said, well, I really want to go to an academy because I'll get a better education and a better leadership. And I said, no, you won't. I'll put ROTC graduates, the top ones, up against the top West Point, Air Force, Naval Academy, any of the academies graduates.
I'd agree 100% on that. It's people think that because you go to us,
what you want out of it is what you're going to get.
Exactly.
Whether you're at an academy or ROTC or OCS, it really doesn't matter.
I 100% agree. People who think that, all officers that come from the academies have this illustrious, ranking above everyone else. I disagree. I think some of the best officers I've worked with were prior enlisted guys who did ROTC or OCS and came in with that lower enlisted background. So I completely agree with you. It doesn't matter where you commission from. It matters about the person you are and the character that you hold. So
right. Yeah. So to answer your question about my leadership style, I was lucky in high school. I had two mentors who I've kept in touch with. I still stay in touch with one, my high school basketball coach, and I kept in touch with my high school teacher until he passed away about 6 months ago. And they were servant leaders. My basketball coach, Coach Terry Niedzwicki, understood that it wasn't about him putting together a great basketball team. We had a good basketball team, but that's not what he understood. That wasn't his main job. His main job was to help develop good young men who were going to be good fathers, good husbands, good citizens in this country. And he did that. And a lot of us stay in contact with him. And my high school history teacher, who was a Vietnam vet, was the same way. And the reason I majored in history beyond any shadow of a doubt was because of him. And he understood, he was always there for you. If you needed a little extra work, if you had a problem in school, not even in his class, but you needed somebody to talk to, he was always there for you to talk. So early on, I got that servant leadership influence. And then I had a great couple first leaders in the Army that had that same mentality. And, here's the one story I always like to tell people. I was a senior first lieutenant and I was working in the S3 shop in a CAV squadron. And the guy who was the S3, a major, he left. And he was one of those guys, if I'm in the office, you're in the office. And he wasn't married. He'd be in the office till 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And he expected us to be there. And we were lieutenants. We did what we were told. And, we just do busy work or whatever, just to kill the time. The first day that this new major came on board, we were all sitting there, 5 o'clock. I'm working on something that's not due for another month, but I'm just killing time. And he stuck his head around the corner and he said, "Oak, what are you working on?" And I said, "Sir, I'm working on an op order that's, this op order." And he said, "Is it due tomorrow?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Then go home."
Where are these officers today? They don't exist, sir.
They don't. It's very few anymore.
You mentioned something in the beginning of this conversation where you said servant leadership. And a lot of people like to say that in their buzzwords. A lot of people like to say that in their briefings, incoming cadets to service academies. You see all these people stand up and say it in front of, random platoons and companies, but very rarely do you see it acted out in person. And I will agree. I think I can count on my hand 1 or 2 officers in my entire service time of like 14 years where I can say that person exemplified actual servant leadership, where they were in the dirt with their guys, so to speak. They were always there when you were there, but they also didn't expect you to do anything they wouldn't be doing themselves at that time. And it's something that it's almost like this entitlement. Like you see this entitlement in leadership and even overseas. And I'm glad that you got to see that experience. And I'm sure that had a deep, profound impact.
Oh, believe me, I had some of the other ones as well.
Sure. Oh, I think we all have, right? I think we all have.
But I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, people don't understand what servant leadership really means and it really takes to be a good servant leader. And, you know, the thing I always tell people, because I talk to a lot of young men and women, and I always try to influence them toward being a servant leader. And, you know, it's funny because a lot of times people will tell me, well, I don't want to be a servant leader because I don't want people walking all over me. I said, but then you have no concept of what servant leadership is. Right. Servant leadership means you are going to have to make people do things they don't want to do because it's in their best interest. And the way I always explain it is, I always, you know, I had my hand in helping to commission over 600 lieutenants for the United States Army and leaders for this country over my last 16, 17 years. And I told every single one of them, every chance I got, look, being a leader, especially a servant leader, means it's not about you, and yet it's all about you. It's not about the title you get or the privileges you get, or that you get nicer pay and get to live in a nicer house and drive a nicer car. Let's face it, leaders get those things sometimes, and that's okay, as long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. If that's the only reason you want to be a leader, please go do something else, because you're not going to be a good one. And I said, it's all about you in how you empower and treat the people that you have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be the leader, and how you run the organization that you have the privilege to lead.
I agree with you 100%. And it's such a profound thing hearing it from you, because I'm going to ask you to put your uniform back on and come back in, because we need people like you back in the Army to do this, right? Because I see it time and time again. Like I said, I can count on my hand 2 officers that I've worked with in the last 10 years that I can say have the same perspective that you do. And it's so difficult to work with these people who come from so many different backgrounds, whether that's active duty, the Guard, or the Reserve, right? Where they're so wrapped up in, we're trying to meet the commander's intent, but we're gonna overwork our guys. We're gonna do mindless tasks on end. We're gonna deploy. We're gonna go to this combat zone, but then only a certain privileged few are gonna know the commander's intent of what's going on, what operations we're doing in Syria or the Middle East. But we're gonna keep everyone else out of the loop. And you know what that happens when privates have idle time in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do, right? Like, bad things happen because they don't understand the bigger purpose. They're not educated on the geopolitics of the situation. And it sounds like you were able to communicate those things so effectively to your people, where, like you said, you commissioned over 600 lieutenants. That's very admirable, because I can't name many officers who commissioned over like 5, because most of them don't want to get talked to after, because they were such terrible people, so to speak, right? But what do you think were, just off the top of my head, what were the top 3 leadership challenges that you saw during your time in the Army that you think really stuck with you and had a profound impact on the people that you were leading?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think number one is I had to learn how to be a better communicator. I think that leaders today are not good communicators. Agreed. And I blame some of that on these things right here.
Oh, definitely, for sure.
But because they think that if they send you a text message, they communicated with you, and they have absolutely not. And so I think I got better at that as I grew up a little bit. I think the other thing that is tough for leaders at all levels, and look, we all have an ego. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you. We all have an ego, and we want people to have an ego, because that's what drives them to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever it is they're doing.
Agreed.
But good leaders know when to put that ego aside. Because you don't have all the answers. You don't have all the ideas. You don't have all the knowledge or the skills. I don't care how long you've been doing what you're doing. And that really was driven home to me my first platoon leader job. Master, or then Sergeant First Class Pinson, who was 6'3", 6'4", 250-pound country boy from Mississippi. And I took over my platoon, and he'd been the platoon leader for about 8 months, and the platoon sergeant. They didn't have a lieutenant. And I took over, and I took over while they were in the field, and he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, "Sir, grab an MRE, let's go have lunch." And we went over and we sat down underneath a tree, and we're sitting there eating lunch, and he said, "Sir, you're the lieutenant, you're the boss. We'll do things however you want to do them." He said, "But my job is to tell you when you're messing up." Mm-hmm. He said, "I've been in the I'm a 24-year-old lieutenant." He said, "I've been in the Army for 23 years. He'd been in the Army almost as long as I've been alive.
Yeah.
He said, "My job is to tell you when you're messing up. If you still want to do it that way, we'll do it that way. You're the boss." He said, "But my job is to help train you as a leader. And I thought, why would somebody not listen to somebody with that kind of experience? But it all comes down to ego. And we gotta, as leaders, need to learn when to put our egos aside. They're good things, but we gotta look. It's good to have an ego, but you gotta learn when to put it aside. So I think that's one of the hardest things for a leader to learn. And I learned it, but I learned it early on. And one of the things that drove it home to me was there was another lieutenant in our platoon who wouldn't put his ego aside, and he paid the price for it several times. But because you got to use the talent that you have, that you got the privilege to lead, you got to use those people. And I think the last thing I would say that is probably the hardest thing, at least it was for me, is to figure out that you got to get to know the people that you lead on a personal level, not just at work, but at a personal level. Get to know people. One of the pieces of advice I gave all of the lieutenants that I helped commission was, I said, your job, you should make it your job every day to go out and find one person in your organization and find out one new thing about them.
It's a great,
not about
great
work, about their personal life. What's their spouse's name? What's their kid's name? What sports do their kids play? What hobbies do they have? What do they like, don't like? And I think one of the things, and I learned that probably about when I was a captain, is when I really started to figure it out, when I was a company commander. And one of the benefits to that was, once I got to know people, not only did it start to build the trust between them and me, but I also then knew what their likes, dislikes, what they were good at, what they weren't good at. And when I started to assign tasks and missions and jobs to people, I knew who to assign it to and who not to assign it to. Because
exactly,
lots of times, I see it all the time, somebody will assign Oak a task and he's horrible at that, but Adam's great at it, but he doesn't know, or she doesn't know, because they don't even know their people.
This is a great point, and I wish more young officers and even junior NCOs and senior NCOs took this advice, is learning, one, like you said, putting aside your ego and learning when you don't know everything. And I think, like you said, that was some of the hardest lessons I've seen young lieutenants learn. And I'll just do a quick story about that. We were overseas, and as you know, the Guard is, when I was overseas with them, they're very interesting because you have such highly experienced civilian people, but they're like E4s. You know what I mean? And we had this one guy who was a literal Google engineer in his civilian job, made 6 figures a year, but he's deployed as an E4 in the S6 over in CENTCOM. And we had our SIPR net go down completely. We lost all communications with our guys and line companies in Syria. And it had something to do with the knock, and all these civilian contractors, hundreds of them, couldn't figure it out at the base we were at. And he literally makes a phone call and goes, "Hey, sir, I can fix this in about 5 minutes because I can recode this." But no one would listen to him because he was an E4, and he's like, "I'm going to let this whole thing burn down. I don't care. You guys want to lose contacts with HIMARS and aviation in a combat zone. That's fine. But I'm telling you, I can fix this in 5 minutes, and I'm not going to charge you a dime." But like you said, some of those officers in that situation could not put their ego aside. And we were out of comms for 72 hours in a combat zone. And we had to use satellite radios. It was like this whole thing. And we had to use the TAC net. It was an absolute disaster.
Well, the example I always use is this. My father's best friend when I was growing up worked at Chrysler Motor Plant, where they assembled vehicles. And he worked there for 38 years. For 38 years, you know what he did? He put the fender on whatever vehicle was being made at that plant. So if you took over that plant and you were having problems with the fenders, who would you go talk to? I hope you'd go talk to the guy who's been doing it for 38 years, but they wouldn't. He probably knew there was a problem, told somebody, and they told him, "Oh, just go back to work.
Just let him fail." Yeah, exactly. And then the second thing you brought up is knowing your people. And I can't emphasize how critical this, even today, I've had cadets who were freshmen when I was a senior and who are now majors, getting ready to promote to lieutenant colonel. And they've reached out to me and said, "Dorito, there was some things I remember when you were, teaching us, when you were our cadre," or even in the Army. I've had young privates reach out to me even now who are now promoting up through the ranks. And they've said, "I've always remembered some of the things that you did to listen and take care of us when we were overseas, because you acted like you cared." And I think that's something that's way undervalued. And like you says, understanding people's strengths and weaknesses, because you can more effectively assign tasks, just like you said, when it counts. And this is so critical in today's peer adversary environment where, we don't have the high ground anymore when it comes to technology and combat operations. The Russians and the Chinese, yeah, their stuff is crappier than ours, but they still have infrared technology. They still have missiles. They still have advanced artillery and aviation aircraft. We're not just fighting a bunch of guys in the sand and sandals, with air superiority and drones, and we can sit around on our cell phones. Now you turn on your cell phone, they can see you from space, because so can we. And this is something where it's understanding the weaknesses and strengths of each individual to make a much more effective team against these oncoming peer threats. I mean, like I said, we've parked 12 warships outside of Iran and Israel right now, and some of these kids don't know what to do without a cell phone because their leadership hasn't cared to get to know them and understand who their family and their kids are, their spouses and everything else. And when it comes down to brass tacks, that is some of the most important things that you could emphasize as a leader, is getting your people to trust you because you've proven that you've cared about them.
Absolutely. And I was lucky. I told every single lieutenant, the best way to get out and get to know the people that you are leading is, there's two ways that are easy every day. Number one, you get out from behind your desk and you go out where they are. Do what they're doing. Get down there and see what they're doing. That not only builds the trust piece and you get to know them, but then that also gives them, okay, he's no better than I am. He's down here doing what I'm doing. And I got leaders got to be behind their desks sometimes, but every opportunity you get out from behind your desk and go out and walk around and talk to people. And the second thing, I had a boss who retired, a 3-star general, good mentor of mine. And he said, Oak, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee. He said, I don't care how high up you get in that organization, go get your own cup of coffee. He said, two things happen. Number one, you show people that you're no better than they are. You got to get your own cup of coffee just like they do. And number two, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways to get to the coffee pot and back to your office. And you take a different way each time, and you stop along the way and talk to people.
Yeah.
And ask them those kinds of questions. I think one of the reasons that leaders are so reluctant to do that is because if you're asking them questions and you want to get to know them, you got to let them get to know you. You got to open up a little bit, because look, nobody trusts somebody they don't know. I'm sorry, it's not human nature. Human nature, you trust the people you know. And now, especially in the military, somebody still may do what you ask them to do because they have to. But how much better would they do it if they trusted you and they wanted to do it? It's just a simple concept, but I don't see a whole lot of it going on these days.
No, I completely agree with you. And that's one thing I'll even give my battalion commander when I was overseas working in the battalion talk, was he took the time, every morning, as a brand new intel guy overseas. He didn't know me at first. He didn't trust, our judgment, because he didn't know who we were. But every morning he'd ask me, what's going on? How am I doing? How's everything going on back at home? And then also, hey, what do I need to know today that's important for our guys up in Syria? Right. And then eventually we built that rapport, and now we're like best of friends. I mean, he writes me recommendation letters still, and I'm not even assigned to his unit anymore. But you're right. It's those leaders that take the time to get their own cup of coffee and take the time, like you said, take a different way back to your office each time to understand the people that are working for you. And like you said, once you get to know people, you're building that trust and rapport with people, and it makes the teamwork so much more effectively. And like I said, for people like you, it's easy. Like this is kind of like who you are and what you developed in. But what I don't understand, and maybe it's an ego thing, like you mentioned before, but why do you think so many leaders in the military today have a problem understanding such simple concepts of servant leadership?
I think there's a very good reason. We have gotten to the point where leaders, they're more important about their next promotion, their next pay raise, what they're going to do after they leave the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, whatever, they're afraid that somebody's going to make a mistake and it's going to affect their next promotion. When I think it's exact opposite. I had another boss who retired, a 4-star general, and he said, oh, leadership is on a scale. He said, and on this end of the scale, you have the authoritarian, micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you to do it leader. and nobody likes to work for that person. We've all worked for that person, and it's horrible. He said, and on this end of the scale, you've got Attila the Hun in chaos. And he's controlled chaos, but chaos. He said, you want to be as far down that road as you can, as much chaos as you can accept. That's where you want to be. He said, because that's where creativity happens.
Agreed.
That's where you're using other people's skills, other people's knowledge, other people's abilities, and they're getting things done. And the way you do that, the way you get to where you can be there is really simple. You develop and enforce a culture, so you know people are going to make decisions based on your culture, what you believe in and what you are willing to accept. You train people to standard, so you know they can do what you're asking them to do without you standing over their shoulder. You give them the resources they need, time, money, people, equipment, whatever it is. You give them the authority to make it happen, and then you get out of their way and let them do it. And you'll be amazed at what they do. But I think so many leaders today are so afraid of what the people they're leading are going to do because they don't know them. They haven't trained them to standard. They don't enforce standards anyway, that they're so afraid somebody's going to mess up and it's going to mess up their next promotion.
This is actually
so they become authoritarian, micromanaging, horrible leaders.
No, I agree. And this is actually a perfect transition to what's going on to the military now. And like I said, we've seen a lot of commanders relieved in the last 6 months from loss of confidence. There's this, and this is kind of more of like a modern political perspective, but there's a lot of infighting going on about the, the transgender movement into the military and how that's affecting operations. But my biggest concern is, are you meeting the standard? I don't care who you are, where you come from, whatever you want to identify as. Like, this wasn't a thing for me in 2006, and I'm definitely sure it wasn't a thing for you back whenever you joined. But what I see now is that people are, and some modern leaders, like I said, they're afraid of getting in trouble. They're afraid of rocking the political boat. And they are more willing to drop the standards of what's expected of them as soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, Guardians now, whatever the Space Force is. Right. And we're seeing the ill effects of it. We're seeing the wrong people being put into leadership positions that shouldn't be there because they want to meet a quota and they want to reach an image versus what's expected of us in combat operations. And, like I said, you saw a lot of great leaders develop in the early 2000s because you had a lot of the late 80s, late 90s guys in senior leadership positions leading those younger troops into combat operations into Iraq and Afghanistan. And then you saw the complete collapse of that around probably 2012, into 2014 during the sequestrian. And a lot of great leaders left. And even now, during the COVID pandemic, and this is what I saw specifically, was we lost, even in my unit specifically, when I was with 19 Special Forces Group as a rigger, we lost so many great senior leaders because they just couldn't put up with the BS anymore. And that allowed the best of the worst to promote into positions of leadership who did not meet the expectations that you've been talking about. And it's been absolutely disastrous. And in your experience, what can we do to remedy this now? So we have a lot of people that should in leadership positions that shouldn't be there. We've lost a lot of great leaders who've retired and are off doing great things in the civilian world now. And now we have, and don't get me wrong, not all of them are terrible, but we have a lot of great young people in the military now who are desperate and starving for that type of inspiration and leadership, but they don't see it. So they take it upon themselves. They go out and do dumb things. They get in trouble.
Or they get out.
Where are they going to get it from? They don't have Oakland McCulloch telling them that they're servant leaders, right? They're having some guy who's more worried about, or woman worried about their promotion or their status, or is everything in the green on the Excel sheet, the ominous Excel sheet of green. So how do we find that? What do we do for those people?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of those lieutenants that I helped commission, a lot of them stay in contact with me. And surprisingly, well, I guess it wouldn't surprise us, a lot of them have gotten out because of that exact reason. And I always equate it to a self-licking ice cream cone. Mm-hmm. So you get a bad leader who then forces the ones who want a good leader and don't see it, they get out. Who stays in? The average or poor leaders who then get promoted because they're the people left, who then become that same leader because that's what they know, and then drive out the next group of good young leaders.
It produces so much cynicism in the system, right?
It's a cycle that just keeps going around and around and around, and we got to break it. So I think the way you break it is, number one, you got to hold people accountable.
Huge.
And we're starting to see that a little bit, but still not enough. I use three. I always emphasize that with these three words: accountability, authority, and responsibility. Unfortunately, we use those interchangeably nowadays, and they're not.
Right.
They are three completely different things. Everybody needs to be held accountable. I don't care if you're a private, a cadet, a private, or a four-star general. You need to be held accountable for your actions, your performance, what you do, what you don't do, what you say, what you don't say. Everybody needs to be held accountable. And for too many years, we've not seen that. And we still don't see it to the level that it needs to be. Then authority, you as the leader, based on your title, your position, you get authority. You need to give that away to people, delegate that to people so they can accomplish the things you're asking them to do. And I don't see that either. People are hanging on to that authority and not giving people that authority who is below them to accomplish things. And then the last piece is responsibility. I'm sorry, you as the leader are responsible for everything that does or does not happen in your organization. You don't get to pick and choose what you're going to be responsible for. You can't say, well, that went well, so I'm going to take responsibility for that. That didn't go so well. I'm going to blame Adam for that. I'm sorry,
Right.
Leaders don't get to do that, at least not good leaders. And we see that at the senior level, at every level, not only in the military, but in the civilian world as well. We see that. I mean, I always use the Afghanistan withdrawal, that debacle. You can't use any other word besides that.
Yeah.
I mean, here, what happened, and you had the president of the United States, arguably the most powerful person in the world, not my fault. Secretary of Defense, probably the second most powerful person in the world, not my fault. The commander on the ground, not my fault. Chief of Staff of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, not my fault. Well, if it's not those four people's fault, then whose is it?
It's obviously that private on the ground who didn't pick up the trash in the Afghani bathroom at H. Kaya, right? And this is,
and then we wonder why we can't recruit people and we can't retain people.
No, I agree. And this is something I actually had a personal connection with. So I was involved in the evacuation for H. Kaya in the background, working the background information side. And I had a classmate from the Air Force Academy who was the first Afghani graduate from the Air Force Academy who his family was trapped overseas. And he knew I worked with 19 Special Forces Group, and he knew I knew some guys on the ground over there. And he said, Adam, can you help me get my family out? So it was literally like using Signal and a bunch of arbitrary apps to start talking to guys overseas and promising them buy them bottles of Johnny Walker Blue, going, hey, Sergeant, first class, blah, 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 from X amount of Special Forces Group. Hey, while you're out there, doing your canvassing, would you mind knocking on this door and doing this target package? And instead of getting 4 people out, combined with some of my fantastic younger cadets who are now pilots, and I use them, hey, I know this girl, actually, I interviewed her. Her name is, at the time, she was First Lieutenant Catherine Brown. Now she's a captain, I believe. But she was on the ground in Afghanistan flying C-17. She was one of those aircraft where the people were falling off of them, right? And she said, Adam, I don't know what to do. And, we were having this discussion. I said, hey, can you scan these wristbands and get them on the back of your plane? No questions asked. And that's what I found fascinating about that entire situation was normal people like me were binding together with, when we saw failed leadership, we found the leaders that we knew could make a difference with those connections. And we did it anyway. We did it behind everybody's back. And that wasn't just me. That was thousands of other service members doing the same thing, trying to get their translators out.
I had a bunch of friends who were doing that same thing.
Yeah. And we ended up getting 36 people out total. And the only reason that it stopped is, and I still have horrible pictures from it, but the last group of people we got over the fence line into the aircraft, it was 15 minutes before the bomb blew at Abbey Gate. And I was in direct contact with some pararescue guys on the ground. And they said, we're closing operations. We're done. It's too risky for us, but why at the time when I was in E4, why was I doing that? You know what I mean? Like, why wasn't an officer in charge of this? Is because we just knew, like you said, noticing the skills and the relationships and the people and getting to know them better. And some people reached out to me and we ended up making great connections with some Air Force Academy and West Point guys and some of my fellow Marines who were also out there. But we got the problem solved. And I think that's what we're seeing in the newest generation too, is that we have so many effective problem solvers, but they have no guidance and they have no leadership because they don't trust the people that are in those positions of command. So what are some of the things of advice you would give to these young people who feel so disconnected from the reality of serving in the military. They join the military to do these great things and serve their country and protect our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But now they're seeing the monotonous tasks and the ill-affected leadership who doesn't care about them. What are some things you could tell them to motivate them to continue their time in service and do better?
Yeah. So just to be clear, I mean, not all leaders in the military are bad leaders.
Correct.
Like you said, we've got some good ones out there, and those are the people that need to be promoted, and we need to get rid of the ones who are bad leaders. But it's funny you asked that question, because I get asked that all the time by young lieutenants that I helped commission and captains who now are captains. And I always tell them, look, first of all, remember why you joined. You joined to, like you said, protect the American way of life, defend the Constitution of the United States. And hopefully my influence was a little bit on you, and to take care of the people that you have the privilege to lead. And I tell them, look, you know, your hands are tied at a certain point. You know, if you got a leader that doesn't believe in any of that or doesn't do any of that, then, you know, you can try to influence that by bringing up suggestions here and there. But if they tell you, shut up, Lieutenant, go do your job, then you got to do your job. Then it becomes your job as the junior leader to shield the people that you have the privilege to lead from some of that horrible leadership. You take the brunt of it. And the last piece I always tell them is, look, in 2 years or maybe less, that bad leader's leaving, and maybe you're going to get a good one. So just wait them out at that point, and then you can decide what you want to do. But, you know, I always told the lieutenants, don't ever get out of the Army based on your first assignment, because there's so many other things that are going to play into that. You may get a bad leader that first time, but there's another one coming in right after that. So, you know, because we rent, as leaders, we rent organizations. We don't own them. Unlike a lot of NCOs who stay in the same unit for 5, 6, 7 years, we are there for 2 years at most, usually, maybe 3 if you're lucky, and then you're out of there, and the next group comes in. So, but I think that, you know, young leaders have to remember what it is that they joined the military for, and just keep reminding themselves of that.
That's something I always did. I always wrote, you know, that on my board every day. It was like, why did I join, when I was going through some of the worst stuff I had to deal with leadership wise? And I think that's great advice. But so you bring up something really important right before we talked about Afghanistan, was like, you know, the president of the United States didn't take accountability. The Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't take accountability. It's nobody's fault except that guy on the ground who forgot to pick up trash in Afghanistan, which I still find that was their issue. And then they're having that was going on. But why do you think there's such a lack of accountability in the military now towards leadership? And why do you think it's so disaffected amongst, you know, these massive positions of leadership that are so important? And, you know, like I said, some private will get, you know, 30 days extra duty for showing up to PT late, but the guy who collapsed Afghanistan is allowed to walk away and retire with no impact to his life. Why do you think there's such a lack of accountability in the military now, from your experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never been asked that question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer for it. I would say one of the reasons is that our senior leadership in the military is bloated. We have way too many general officers than we need, and they're filling positions that really have no need to be filled by a general officer. And so there's that part of they're not accountable for what they do. You know, just take the budget. You know, we haven't passed an audit in the Pentagon for how many years?
Ever.
8, 10 years. Let some staff sergeant, platoon, you know, supply sergeant down in a platoon or a company not pass their audit and see what happens.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. You will find that radio battery and you'll be doing hands around America to find those nods, right?
Absolutely. So I think that that's part of the problem, is that they're in positions that nobody's holding them accountable, and they get used to that. I think the other piece of it is, and I saw this right at the end of my career on active duty as well, but I certainly see it now. You know, when I was I had 3 platoons, 38 38, 39 months of platoon time. I had 2 company commands, which ended up being about 29 months of company command time. I did 2 years as an S3 in an armor battalion. So 25, 26 months in responsibility. Today, young lieutenants are lucky if they get a year as a platoon leader.
Yeah.
They get 1 command
Yep.
of 12 months exactly. They get 1 year as an S3 or an XO. And then we're promoting them to battalion command.
It's wild. It's wild. It makes no sense at all whatsoever.
We haven't prepared them to take over that leadership position.
But go fight China and Russia, right? You know what I mean? Like, absolutely not. And I think one thing that's killing us right now is Russia and China, and even the Koreans, they're getting so much of this actual pure adversary command time right now in Ukraine. And that's something we were watching from the forefront, is like, damn, like these guys are actually getting frontline command, like in the field. You're not going back. You're not rotating out every 30 days. Like, this is serious, like, experience that American officers are just not getting, you know, other than like JRTC
or
NTC training environments.
And NCOs are so important to our fight. You know, somebody asked me, I was an instructor at the Australian Staff College for 2 years. And one of the Australian, I don't know if it was an Australian or if it was one of the Allied soldier majors, asked me, so what is it that sets the American military apart from the rest? And I told them, number one, used to be at least, our training. I'm not sure that's true anymore. Number two, I said, was that we have delegated down to the lowest level decision-making. In the American military, sergeants were making decisions that in many other countries, colonels make. And I'm not sure that's true anymore either.
I would actually agree with that. And not to cut you off, but that was my biggest experience, even working with some of the Jordanian armed forces over there, is that they have a really piss poor NCO corps. And the only people making decisions at a minimum are their lieutenants, and then everything else is like major and above. So it's dissipated chaos in the lower ranks, because they're always waiting on some officer with minimal to zero experience on telling them when to eat, when to shower. When that's like you said, that's an NCO job. That's a senior E4's job, you know, and that's definitely something that sets us apart on the American military side.
So I think that's part of the problem that we see today. And I think that, you know, and we kind of saw, we had the experience in the Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I mean, I was in that conflict, and we got some real world experience. It wasn't first class enemy, peer group enemy, like some would say, but we at least got some. But, you know, I heard a great podcast, and I can't even remember who it was now, but a sergeant major in the Marine Corps, a high ranking sergeant major, you know, not just a company or battalion sergeant major, like, I don't know if it was a division sergeant major, or maybe it might even been the sergeant major of the Marine Corps. I don't know. And somebody asked him about war, and he said, you know, I've seen more combat than most people, but I haven't seen war. Not the war that we're talking about. If we go with China or Russia, with a near peer competitor, somebody who's actually as good as we are.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem.
We haven't seen that since World War II.
You're right. It's definitely going to be a problem. It's something that actually absolutely terrifies me, is because we've become so complacent in this 20-year global war on terror with our technology and our superiority. And most of the time when our guys were getting killed, it was IEDs, you know, drone strikes, you know, guerrilla, you know, ambushes and stuff in the mountains. But you're not putting line company on line company, artillery versus artillery, air assets versus air assets. And we're seeing that in Ukraine, and we're seeing that, you know, I saw that with the drones and everything else, and the drone swarms. And it is absolutely terrifying to see, because I even admitted we're not ready for this. You know, my guys currently right now are more worried about how much battery their cell phone has, you know, versus getting out there and learning the basics, getting back to basic soldiering, compass work.
I think that's a problem that we have in our military today, is that we are over reliant on technology.
I agree. 100%.
Believe me, that technology can go away in a heartbeat, and the Chinese are figuring out how to do that. I promise you. But, you know, most of the officers and probably the NCOs out there can't even read a map and use a compass, because
it's terrible.
because we got so used to GPS and all that we don't even really teach that anymore. And if we do, it's at the very basic level.
Well, it's terrifying because I even saw that in the Middle East. Like the Russians developed this new jamming system that was jamming all of our GPS assets, which made our HIMARS artillery not as accurate as it normally is, right? We had to use like dead reckoning to launch attacks. And you see some of the guys like pulling out manuals, even the Apache helicopter pilots having to pull out paper maps because their nav systems wouldn't work because they had these jamming systems, right? And you're seeing that this is an actual problem. And, even the most basic things I've seen now, and even in like the civil affairs unit I serve in now, is like there's NCOs are not even teaching their low enlisted how to properly pack a ruck. What do you need with you? It's not just candy bars and cell phone chargers, okay? Like you need to be out there and be able to sustain yourself for several days on end if shit goes bad, because the Army, they might get you MREs, but most of the time you're screwed. Like they're not going to bring what they need, right? And this is something that you brought up about our generals being overbloated. I don't know if you ever read the book called The Generals by Tom Ricks, but this is something that was a fascinating book from World War I, basically all to the global war on terror with McChrystal. And do you know how many 4-star generals there were in World War II?
12 or 14 or something like that.
7. It was 7. So right now we have, like you said, we have 4-star generals, 3-star generals everywhere. They're almost like privates at this point, in every command structure. But in World War II, if you lost the battle, if you lost a significant amount of casualties,
you got relieved.
You were fired. You got sent home, and then the next guy took up because there was standards and accountability. And I think this is so important now. And I know you only have 15 minutes left because you have a hard time to hit. But this is actually the last question I wanted to get to. Which is very specific to what's going on at our service academies and especially our Air Force Academy. So I'll give you a little bit of background because I think a lot of the cadets who are watching this right now, because I told them to tune in this afternoon, I wanted to give them a different perspective from someone that's not me. And there is a new general officer. He was previously the commander of AFSOC. His name is Lieutenant General Bonenfeld or something. I can't pronounce his name right. He was basically relieved of command in AFSOC because of some squirrely things that went around with finance and everything else. He was not very well liked in the AFSOC community, Air Force Special Operations Command, so pretty high-end area of responsibility. And he was basically given the option to retire, or you can take the superintendent 3-star position at the Air Force Academy. So they gave it to him at the Air Force Academy, and he is now the new superintendent. And this kind of breaks my heart. And like his nickname amongst the pararescue jumpers was Fat Tony. So right then and there, you're not gaining a million points going into your new command system. But I'm going to defend him a little bit here because my biggest focus with launching these podcasts and everything else and having these discussions with great leaders like you is that our service academies are not producing the caliber of officer we need right now in near peer adversary threats. And the Air Force Academies and West Point and Annapolis have been in a free fall spiral of cadets doing whatever they want. It's almost like, the summer of free love over there. They've had a lot of rape and sexual assault incidences and DUIs and all this other stuff going on. And they've lost, they've had all these freedoms, especially during COVID. And that happened with the previous command. So this guy comes in, and this came up this week, and a lot of cadets are reaching out to me and complaining, saying, well, this guy is coming in and saying we can't wear civilian clothes anymore. And I sat there and went, okay, so what? And they're taking away our freedom, and we're not getting enough mental health breaks. I sat there and went, well, wait a minute. The academies have been screwed up a long time, at least, especially since I graduated in 2010, with lack of standards and discipline. And like you said, you give idle hands are the devil's work, right? Bad things happen when people don't have areas of discipline. So his perspective coming in from AFSOC is we are going to get back to basics. I want to make you war fighters. There's going to be no civilian clothes. You're not going to get passes. You're not driving your car. We are going to be filling up all of your free time with military training time. Now, that can go one of two ways, in my opinion. You can have legitimate military training time, doing joint training at Fort Carson with other Air Force bases in the area, actually giving these cadets good exposure to the lower enlisted and active duty components, or you can make them do dumb stuff like PowerPoint slides on fire extinguisher training. I don't know what that's going to look like yet for them. So like I said, you can make it really bad for them, or you can make it really good. But I don't think a lot of cadets understand outside of the academy sphere of just because you made it through freshman year, which is when you have all these restrictions. Now he's putting these so-called 4th class cadet restrictions on all of the classes, not just because they are in a training environment. As much as senior cadets at the academy think their rank matters, you're nothing until you get on active duty and you're actually commissioned, right?
Exactly.
So for me, I don't really feel bad. I'm like every Army school I've gone to, even now, I can't wear anything less than PT gear on any part of base, because you're in a professional training environment, right? So right. I think bringing the standards of this is a military training institute and we're here to train you. don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think, it's like learning to embrace the suck together, collectively as cadet squadrons. I think that can actually be a good thing if it's done correctly. But from your perspective, if you had to give advice to this 3-star general now who has come in and he's crushed all the hopes and dreams of all these cadets, taking away all their privileges and everything else, saying we're going to train to be military leaders, what are some motivating things or things you could tell them? Like I said, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if he's going to screw up the training aspect of it yet. Like they're not even allowed to have grills anymore. There's no more grill outs. We're all just going to sit here. I'm like, yeah, it's like the Army and the Marine Corps. Welcome to the military. What are some things you think you could advise these cadets on when it comes to understanding the basics of being a good military leader, understanding that, losing your privileges isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what can they expect when they develop into second lieutenants and what that might mean for them having those experiences to teach their lower enlisted when they do become commissioned officers?
Yeah, so I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to reestablish the culture that should have been there all along and is missing it at all the academies, including West Point. The culture has changed so much, and I got it. There's lots of reasons why that happened. None of them good, in my opinion, but I got it. So he's trying to reestablish the culture, and then he's trying to reestablish standards. And one of the things I always that I always enforced was when I was in charge is I'd walk in, every day and I say, okay, guys, gals, this is what we have to accomplish today. And this is the standard we're going to meet. If we meet it at 3:00, we get to go home. If we don't meet it till 10:00 tonight, we're here till 10:00 tonight. Doesn't matter. We're going to meet that standard. And I think that's what he's trying to do. And again, assuming that he's going to do it right, like you were saying.
Yeah. And that's a big thing is he going to do this right?
Yeah. Make it actual training that is beneficial. It just isn't like the major I had, the first major I had when I was in the S3 shop. You're going to be here because I told you to be here,
right?
And I'm here. That's going to be a disaster if that's the way it is. But if he makes it to where they understand the training standard, that we have standards, we're going to meet them, and then once the culture is reestablished and standards start being met again, then my bet is then he'll start loosening some of those. Giving back some of those things that he took away, rightfully so, because that's what good leaders would do.
I actually agree with this.
Once we meet what we were supposed to meet, now we can loosen things up a little bit. But until you prove to me that that's the way it's going to be, we're going to stick with it until we get you there. And again, that's my opinion, that's part of servant leadership, because even though those cadets don't know that that's what they need, that is what they need. And
I would agree with you.
And hopefully that's the thought process going through this three-star general's mind. Not that he would ask my opinion, I'm sure, but that's my.
I have a feeling he's gonna watch this because the leadership at USAFA watches everything that I do. So hey, General, we're on your side as long as you decide to do it the right way and we have effective training. If we're teaching kids how to use map and compass, so to speak, or we're going out and flying planes, or we're jumping out of planes, or you know what, I suggest, sir, you actually call up Fort Carson, Schriever, Peterson, get these cadets on their training. If they can't go out this weekend, have them go work with an air crew on the flight line to learn their lower enlisted jobs and see the airplanes up close, because that's awesome training. If you're actually doing cool military stuff and you're out there in the suck and you're camping in the rain and doing all the dumb stuff, you're going to build so much more unity and collective cohesiveness in a unit and a group of people that trains together and embraces the suck together. But if you're just restricting cadets to their cadet area and they can't do anything and you're making their lives miserable with no focus, and just like we discussed in the middle of this, in the beginning of this podcast, what is the intent? What is the commander's intent? And I agree with you 100%.
And you got to communicate it.
Have to communicate it.
And if he hasn't done that, then he needs to communicate to him why he's doing what he's doing. Because, one of the things I figured out, when I was a young lieutenant, I never asked the question why, ever. Somebody told me to do something as long as it was legal, moral, and ethical. I did it. This generation, the ones that are coming up now, they want to know why. And they do want to know why. There's nothing wrong with that. It just took a couple of years for this old man to figure out there's nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I've figured out is if you can explain the why, you got it. They'll do whatever you ask them to do as long as they know why.
And I think that's the biggest issue cadets are having now is he had a giant meeting where no cell phones were allowed because it'll all get back to me eventually anyway. And he pretty much told them no more civilian clothes, passes are canceled, everything's done. Every weekend's going to be training until further notice, but he didn't explain why. And that's why so many cadets were freaking out and reaching to me. I'm like, oh, great. I'm actually having this awesome podcast this afternoon and I'm going to talk about it. But I think you're right is that if if the commandant and the superintendent, the 1-star and the 3-star collectively say, yes, we're canceling all your training. However, the intent is to prepare you for war. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have beneficial training. I think this could actually be a really good example that even West Point and Annapolis could follow in the footsteps of USAFA. I mean, like I said, this general did not have the best reputation from AFSOC coming in here, but this is a chance for him to change his perspective even on the active duty side before he does retire after this stint here at the academy. And I think that if he provides the why to these new younger cadets and he gives them purposeful training, this could be revolutionary. This could be the change that you and I have both been searching for in this modern military against our peer adversaries. But like you said, if it's non-purposeful training, this could end up in an absolute like disaster for that chain of command for sure.
Yeah. I agree. And for the cadets.
So,
because now you've taught them a bad lesson.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I know you got to get out of here in 5 minutes. So let's just do some closing remarks. One, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Tuxes and Tomahawks podcast. This has actually been a really fun conversation for me. And I hope it inspires the generations of young leaders that follow me and listen to me to get some experience and guidance from you from outside of their command circles to understand the bigger picture. But what are some closing things that you would like to say to the audience about what you're doing? Where can they find you? Where can they connect with you? And, if they really want to reach out to you, how can they do that? And what are some last tidbits of advice you could give to all the young enlisted and officers that watch my show?
Yeah. So I'm at this point in my life, I'm really out on the speaking circuit. I'm talking about leadership and success and how to be a better leader and how to improve your chances of being successful. I always caveat success that nobody can stand up there and give you this checklist. You do all these things and you're going to be successful. I'm sorry, that's not called life. That's called fantasy land. We can give you things that you can do that will help increase your possibilities of being successful. But then you got to go out and actually do them and be good at it. So that's what I'm doing now. People, just like where we met on LinkedIn, that's my main social media, that and my website. And then my website and my social and LinkedIn have my cell phone number, my email address. If one of your young cadets want to reach out to me and talk to me, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, I stay in contact with a bunch of the lieutenants that I had the privilege to help commission. So I'm always happy to do that. One of the last things I always like to tell people, young aspiring leaders or young leaders, is something that somebody told me a long, long time ago. And he said, Oak, as a leader, you are going to make a difference in somebody's life every day. Guaranteed. Why not make a conscious decision to make a positive difference? Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes you don't yell at somebody or, you punish somebody or, there's got to be accountability, but you try to make a positive difference in at least one person's life every day. Imagine how much better our military would be, our families would be, our communities would be, the towns, cities, states, this country, the world would be if every leader went out every day, found one person, just one, and made a positive difference in their life.
That's amazing, sir. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you offering other cadets and NCOs and officers to reach out to. So everyone who watched, everyone who's live right now, make sure you reach out to Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. He's on LinkedIn. You can get all his information there, and I'll also post it in the bottom of the show notes when this goes on the episode side today. I want to thank you so much for this time, sir, and I'm going to be reaching out to you. I think I might be using you as a mentor in the future as well as I continue to progress my Army career with these people.
And I'm always happy to come back on somewhere down the road, Adam, if you want.
Oh, no, absolutely. Whenever you have time, you let me know when you want to come on. I'll throw you on the schedule. I think I would like to have you as a regular. And also, I would also like to, and I'll talk to you about this later, but I work a podcast with the Green Beret and Pararescue called I Came With Fire. I would love to have you come on their show as well. They are great servant leaders. They're in the special operations community, and we need more great officers like you to give guidance to the younger people today, because they're, like I said, they're desperate for this leadership, they're desperate for this advice, and I will definitely get you in contact with Chris and Brandon and Aaron over there today. I'll send a connecting email for you for that.
Okay,
So
sounds good.
Anyway, this has been episode number 39 with Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. Thank you for coming on the show, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Adam.